So here's a quick video. We're going to go through several more examples from 10.2 solving with the quadratic formula. So if you want to follow along, this is actually in OneNote. It's under the Test 5 tab, and then the tab is titled More Practice for 10.2. And there's 3 more examples. These I actually took a screenshot of right out of the homework. So these look just like your homework problems, but just different numbers. So before we jump into that, you need to know all this information. Now, I will give you, and in Hawks, the quadratic formula will be given. However, you need to know what to plug in for A, B, and C. I'll give you that formula, but you need to know what it all means. Also, you need to know this chart down below. It is in your notes. Here it is again on the screen. I will not give you anything about the chart. You need to know all of that, and we'll kind of walk through some examples to show you what all of this stuff means. But quadratic formula will be given, chart will not. So you need to have that chart memorized. All right, so here's our first example. It says, consider the following equation, negative y squared plus 8y plus 8 equals 0. Find the values for A, B, and C that should be used, and then use the discriminant, determine the type and number of solutions, and then solve. So there are actually 3 different questions I'm doing here. And on your actual computer screen, it'll come up. Step 1 will be first, and then you'll enter your answer. Step 2 will be. So for step 1, it just says find A, B, and C. Now, if you remember, standard form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So it's equal to 0, so I don't have to move anything over. And then A, B, and C just come in order. So A is the number in front of x squared, negative 1. B is the number in front of x, 8, and then C is the constant way out back. So A is negative 1, B is 8, and C is 8. Now step 2 says use the discriminant, which they give you. Use the discriminant to determine the type and number of solutions. Well, the discriminant, I have to find that number first, so I plug in b squared minus 4ac. So I have b squared minus 4 times a times c. Type that all into your calculator. You get out 96. So because 96 is a positive number, that means I'm going to have 2 real solutions. That does not mean 96 is my solution. That just tells me that the number and type of solutions will be 2 real. Now I'm going to take it one step further and then actually solve it. So I solve, there's the quadratic formula right there. They give it to me. You're going to plug everything in. So I have negative b, which means opposite b. Well, b is 8, so the opposite is negative 8. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, but that is the number I just found, all over 2 times a, which is negative 1. So I'm going to simplify the radical first. Well, the square root of 96 isn't a nice perfect number, so I'm going to have to work off to the side and simplify using my factor tree. So you can see my factor tree in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. I know it's kind of jumbled up. So I have 2 2's coming out. That gives me 4. And then I have a 3 and a 2 staying inside, which gives me a 6 inside. And then carry everything else over. Multiply that bottom. 2 times negative 1 gives me negative 2. Now here's a little trick that I'll have to do some simplifying. So if you notice on top, I have a negative 8 and a 4. Well, those 2 things have something in common. So I can factor out go ahead and take out a negative 4 because that negative 8. So I take out a negative 4, which leaves me with negative 8 divided by negative 4 gives me 2. And then 4, take out a negative 4, gives me negative 1. But if you notice, I already have a negative sign right there. So I don't need to actually write negative and then negative 4. So I have 1, then the square root of 6, all over negative 2. Well, I don't need to write that 1 because I don't need to write 1 being multiplied out front. So now that I have factored something out, I can now cancel. And here I can cancel the 4 and the 2, and then the negative signs will also cancel, which will leave me with 2 and 1. So I have 2. That is my final answer. And that simplifying only happens if the two numbers outside the radical, have something in common. You cannot just cancel -8 and -2 because that -8 is touching positive and negative. And remember, you can only cancel if, like in the next step, it's actually touching multiplication. All right, so here's our next example. X squared minus 2x equals 1. Well, I have to get it equal to 0, so I'm going to minus 1 from both sides. And now step 1 says find A, B, and C. Well, A is 1. B is -2. And C is -1. Now, use the discriminant, and there they tell me exactly what the discriminant is, to determine the number of solutions. So I'm going to plug in b squared minus 4ac. B squared minus 4 times 1 times c. Put that thing into your calculator. You get out 8. 8 is positive, so I'm going to have 2 real solutions. Now I want to take all of that and plug it into the actual equation where the next part says, okay, well then solve using the equation. So I have opposite b, so it was -2. Positive 2 is 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which I just found that to be 8 all over 2 times a. So I have 2 plus or minus square root of 8. I'm going to do my factor tree in the corner over here, which gives me 2 square root 2, and then all over 2. 2 times 1 is 2. Now again, I look at the numbers on top outside the radical. Well, 2 and 2 have a 2 in common, so I'm going to factor a 2 out of both of those things highlighted in green, which gives me 1 plus or minus 1 square root 2 all over 2. And remember, I don't need to write the 1 because it's being multiplied. Now I can go through and cancel 2 and 2. So my answer is 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. And in Hawks, you have to write it separated, the plus or minus separated. So make sure, make sure you're aware of that. All right, last example. 7x squared minus 1 equals 7x. So I'm going to get it equal to 0, so I'm going to move the 7x over. So minus 7x minus 7x. Okay, so there's my new equation. Step 1, find A, B, and C. Well, A is 7, B is -7, and C is -1. Now in step 2, the first thing it says is find the discriminant. So I've got b squared minus 4 times a times c. Fill in all those numbers, type it into your calculator, and you get 77. Now the second part says, here's your formula, solve it. So I'm going to go through and plug everything in. So negative b, opposite b, it was -7, so when I plug in the opposite of 7, or opposite of -7, I get +7, plus or minus the square root of what I just found, 77, all over 2 times a, which is 7. Go through and multiply the bottom, gives you 14. 7 plus or minus the square root of 77. Doesn't reduce because it's just 7 times 11. So that is your final answer. Also, we should mention up here with the discriminant that was 2 real solutions. With this, a lot of people, a common mistake is to go and cancel the 7 and the 14. You cannot do that because 7 is touching addition and subtraction. The only way you can cancel is if you have a number that is factored all the way out. And here, I have a 1. I can't I can't factor out anything from 7 and 1. So my final answer is 7 plus the square root of 77 over 14 and 7 minus the square root of 77 all over 14. And that is what you would type into Hawks.